So, good evening. Come back and welcome to people who are joining us on the retreat from other parts of the world. You'll be pleased to know the weather is becoming a little brighter and... Oh, no it isn't, it's changing again, sorry. So, we've been looking at this question of attention, prayer as the essence, the prayer of the heart as the essence of prayer, and attention as the essence of prayer of the heart. Not thinking about God, but being with. Not looking at, but paying attention to. There's a big difference between looking at or staring at something and gazing upon it or paying attention to it. When you look at something, you're turning it into an object, you're analyzing it maybe from a distance or judging it against other things. But when you're gazing upon something or someone in pure attention, in other-centeredness, that is contemplation, you're really doing a work of love. I don't think you can gaze upon anything without loving it. That is the essence of attention. And why meditation, after 30 years, makes you a more loving person. Or maybe a little bit before 30 years, sorry. So we've been looking at also the traditional stages of contemplation in some of the mystical teachings. That first stage of natural contemplation, as we called it, where you are able to see beyond the surface of things into the radiance of them, into the divine fire, or the divine source, or the divine presence, which gives depth and wonder to all things. St. Augustine said, what did he say? Can't mention it. What did he say? I wrote it down and lost it. But anyway, what he said was, or he should have said, something like, there is nothing in the natural world, nothing natural or nothing in nature that does not have wonder in it, that does not evoke the sense of depth and amazement in us if we really look at it. So this is the first stage of contemplation, and it's a wonderful awakening to the friendliness of the universe. And we're able to see others, even those who may be causing us harm or irritation, or our enemies, or, as we'll see in a minute, those who betray us. We are able to look upon them with the eyes of love and to see their goodness, to see the essential goodness in them. And I think this is something we can experience by meditating with people. Often when you meditate, perhaps in a group every week or regularly with the same people, you come to see them and relate to them in this quality of friendship, in this special, rather special kind of spiritual friendship, which doesn't depend upon what you know about them, information, or what do you have in common, or can you be allies in your job or in other things. It's something that is really quite heart to heart. It's an intuitive, direct perception of the goodness in the other person that seems to arise, not without challenges, but seems to arise most strongly when we enter into deep prayer with other people and spend that time of contemplation or attention with them. I heard a practical example of this recently where there was a place of work where a group of people decided they were going to meditate together every morning, early morning. And to their surprise and disappointment, a woman from one of the other departments, one of the other offices, who they disliked and everybody disliked, and who was generally a rather unpopular and difficult and sort of negative person in the organization. To everyone's amazement, she turned up in the meditation group, but without a smile or any comment. She wasn't a very chatty person, apparently. But anyway, they didn't say to her, "Go away, we don't want to meditate with you." They welcomed her, and morning after morning, they meditated together with her. And they said that after, I don't know how much time it was, a few weeks maybe, they began to notice that there was a change in their relationship. It wasn't that they all suddenly become saints, or that the difficulties in the personalities weren't there, but that they looked on her, and she presumably looked on them, in a different way. And that quick judgment and dismissal that we sometimes make of people that we don't like or who irritate us, that diminished, and they found themselves seeing her in a new way, in a more accepting way, and I think they said there was no other factor in that process except meditation which could have caused it. So something happens in that silence where we are able to see into the goodness at the heart of things. Then that second stage that we looked at is a stage where we have to learn to detach from some of those benefits and some of that immediate enjoyment of meditation and its effects. St. John of the Cross calls it the night of the senses, and he says this is actually the beginning of the deeper journey of contemplation, because up until that point we're meditating, as it were, to get the benefits and to get enjoyment from it, and we find pleasure in that and reassurance in that. But then we're led to another place where we have to practice the detachment or the renunciation or the letting go, the poverty of spirit, as Jesus calls it, which is really in the essence of attention itself. So you're just really following through the logic or the reality of this work of attention that you started. And you have to repeat this act of attention at deeper levels. It's the same thing, but you have a sense of being on a journey. You're repeating something, repeating the mantra, you're repeating the meditation on a regular basis, and yet this repetition is amazingly transformative and leads you to new levels. And at this in this second stage, we really begin to practice this letting go, and we learn a purer and more maturing a kind of fidelity. We're faithful to the practice even when it doesn't give us these satisfactions or these pleasures or these good things. And we begin to see that our imagination is changing as a result of this. The images we have of ourselves, the image we have of God. If we have an image of God, it will almost certainly be affected by this process. And as a result of that, we'll see that some of the ways we like to spend our time or money or will be changing too. The values, the interests, the priorities of our lives will begin to shift and change as well. We may be surprised at, or other people may be surprised at seeing this in us. And then in the third stage of contemplation, we break through, or we enter into a place where we really begin to experience the logic of attention, the other-centeredness of it, where we begin to realize that what we are paying attention to God, is also paying attention to us. So now a relationship, a deeper, more mysterious and yet more intimate relationship begins to develop. We experience this in one sense as a self-knowledge. We come to know ourselves more deeply, and with that self-knowledge comes the challenge, of course, of self-acceptance. But that self-knowledge is really a consequence of the knowledge of God, of us, God's knowledge of us, that intimate and loving knowledge of us, which we become conscious of through prosperity and adversity. You remember we were talking this morning, whether the meditation is going well, whether our life is going well, whether we're getting all the things we want and all our plans are being nicely fulfilled, or those stages, phases of life where the opposite seems to happen, where we don't get what we want. And meditation, for example, seems to be a bit of a disaster. And we may find ourselves really struggling here. And the ego, which has undergone quite a lot of change, of reconditioning, reprocessing, the ego, although we may be less egocentric as we enter into this stage, what is left of the ego can be extraordinarily painful and disruptive. And yet at the same time, there is this deepening sense, this deepening simplicity in our experience of the divine love, of God's attention to us. Anyway, these are ways of using some of the language and images of the mystical tradition, mystical teachers, to describe something that we may not be sort of writing in our journal, pass from stage 1 to stage 2 at 2 o'clock this morning. But with a certain perspective of the journey we're making, we can be aware of these stages or changes. So I'd like to anyway, just before we move on, there's a story, an Indian story, but it probably pops up in other traditions as well, that captures something of this journey, and the challenge to us of the invitation, of that sense of attraction that makes us begin the journey of faith and the practice of meditation itself. And it's about a king who invites his people to come to visit him, to come into his presence. And so they're all delighted, of course, and they all walk up the hill to the castle, and they find at the just beyond the first gate of the castle, because there are many gates that they have to go through to get to the inner audience chamber, they find these wonderful baskets of fruit and food. So some of them say, "Oh, that's very kind of the king to leave us these," and they forget the actual nature of the invitation that they received, which was to see him, and so they take the fruit and go back home with it, satisfied with what they got. And the rest move on to the next gate, And at that gate, they find baskets of precious jewels and gems, and again they think, oh, the king is a wonderful king giving us all these things. And so some of them stuff their pockets with the jewels and go back home as well. And the third lot come to another gate, and there are more precious or wonderful things there, the satisfaction of their desires, and again they take what they can and go back, give up. And then a small remnant, remember Jesus saying rather pointedly, the road that leads to life is narrow and few there are who find it. Anyway, the few who are left keep on and go through the next gate and the next gate and don't get seduced by these possessions or consolations or however you want to call it. And then finally they enter into this great audience chamber where the king is there present, and being in his presence is more than all the other presence added together. Here in his presence they are totally recognized, embraced and fulfilled. So it's a little parable of the fact that we are repeating the same act of attention and the renouncing of our tendencies to illusion and to possessiveness at each stage and at deepening stages of the journey. Do you think we should turn the lights on? It's a bit dark in here. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So, so let's sort of gather together some of all of this, and just with keeping it in mind, look at the gospel of today, which is a rather poignant and painful and disturbing scene in at the Last Supper, which is the first event of the sequences of events that lead us through the stages or the gates of the Passion. So let's just listen to this. This is where Jesus is asked, Jesus recognizes and says that he is going to be betrayed, which sets the cat among the pigeons among the disciples. Having said this, Jesus was deeply disturbed and declared, "In all truth I tell you, one of you is going to betray me." So the first thing here is to notice is he's very disturbed about this, which is what you would expect when he had come to the recognition or the insight that he was going to be betrayed by one of his own inner circle. So although he has this insight and knowledge, he also has a perfectly recognizable human reaction to this painful, nightmarish experience, if anyone has ever had it, of betrayal. Betrayal always works both ways, but the disciples looked at each other, wondering whom he meant. As usual, the disciples are shown not quite getting what Jesus is meaning. He's always one step ahead of them. He's always opening their minds to further. The disciple Jesus loved was reclining next to Jesus. So immediately you have this contrast between the one who is going to betray him and the one who is closest to him. In the same place, at the same time, you have these two opposite principles of love and betrayal. Simon Peter signed to him and said, "Ask who it is he means." So Peter there, the kind of doesn't ask himself. See all the politics of this, don't you? Emotional politics. So why doesn't he just say, "Lord, who does he mean?" Or "Jesus, who do you mean?" So he so leaning back close to Jesus, to Jesus' chest, he says, "Who is it, Lord?" And Jesus answered, "It is the one to whom I give the piece of bread that I dip in the dish." And when he had dipped the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. At that instant, after Judas had taken the bread, Satan entered him. Jesus then said, "What you are going to do, do quickly." So this is the little pivotal point of the story, which the act of betrayal leads on to his arrest and his trial and his execution. What do you feel about that? So Jesus, why, for example, what is the meaning of Jesus giving the piece of bread, dipping the piece of bread, but who's he giving this information to? It's John, isn't it? Okay. So it's only to John. Why to John?
Because he was his closest.
Because he was his closest companion. Why does he do it at all, though?
To have him as a witness.
Hmm?
To have him as a witness.
Okay, yes. To have him as a witness, and what else maybe? Why would he want to respond to this question, who is it who's going to betray me?
To fulfill the prophecy?
Okay, to fulfill the prophecy.
Maybe for their safety as well, so they know who's changing sides on this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Although it's only John that knows this,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Is he assuring John in some way?
Yeah?
Because it says somewhere else they were all worried.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, Jesus said, "I'm going to be betrayed."
Yeah.
He tells that to everybody. But, of course, they want to know who is going to betray you. But they don't ask him that. Why don't they ask him that? Why don't they just say openly? Why doesn't Peter say, "Who is it?" Why do they go through John? Who is the least likely person there to betray him? He's the one who loves him most intimately. So he's the least likely. So that means what about the others? Could be any of them, doesn't it? Could be any one of them. Does that make them a little nervous?
Yeah.
Not me, surely. No. So maybe that's why Peter, who is the leader of the pack, and as it were represents the others and their concern, asks John, the least likely, the most faithful, to ask him, and Jesus gives a sign, but he doesn't. He gives the sign to John, actually. Do the others know about it? Do the others know that it's Judas? I don't think they do they? Because after Judas leaves the room, they don't know why he leaves. It says, none of the others at the table understood why Jesus said, go and do what you've got to do.
Does it sort of throw them into self-doubt? They don't know themselves or whether it is themselves.
Okay, yes. Okay, so it's very disturbing. He's disturbed, and clearly he's deeply disturbed, it says, at what he perceives to be about to happen. So that disturbs them, and then they also know why he's disturbed, that he has this premonition of betrayal, which makes them even more disturbed in their own right, because they might think that it will be them, or that he thinks it will be them. So it's a very disturbing time. It must spoil the party completely. And yet, what is happening here? So he gives this piece of bread. What happens to the bread at the Last Supper? It's broken and. Well, yeah, he shares it, and he says, "This is me," doesn't it? He has consecrated the bread. And in the Gospel of John, we don't actually have the words of consecration, but here they are at supper, and here is the bread, and it's this bread that he has shared with them and said, "This is me that I'm sharing myself with you, and I will feed you as this bread feeds you." And then it's this very symbol or sacrament of his what? His body, yeah, and his love for them. What does he do? He gives it to the person who is going to betray him. Right? What does that say about communion? Yes. Forgiveness. Actually, it's anticipated forgiveness, isn't it?
Acceptance.
And acceptance. This is a very deep knowledge of human weakness, as he previously understood in the Garden of Gethsemane, when they fell asleep. And then at that instant, so this is a dark sort of mystery here. He gives this bread, this sacred symbol of himself and of his love, to the person he knows is going to betray him. And then he says, okay, get on with it. Do what you're going to do, and do it quickly. What does that suggest?
The part about Satan entered him when he took the bread makes it sound as if Jesus caused Judas to start to aware. It almost makes me feel like maybe he wouldn't have if Jesus
Yes.
had told him and given him the bread.
Yes. It becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yes. There's a very, but I think what we're seeing here are light and shade, aren't we? Opposites, because there is an intimacy clearly with John, the disciple who was leaning on his breast at the dinner, the one who he loved, the closest one. But there's also this kind of intimacy with Judas too, isn't there? He knows Judas very well, as well as John.
Laurence,
Hmm.
there's a question, quick question.
Okay.
Martina says, could you ask Father Laurence about the act of Satan entering Judas once he has received bread? Does that mean that Judas did not think of betraying Jesus before that? it would mean that Jesus decided on Judas that he should be the one to betray him.
Well, not quite, because he does say at the beginning, one of you will betray me. And there certainly is a sense, I think what the story, I don't think we can say, Jesus made Judas betray him. But what we can say is that the betrayal of Judas is an essential part of the story, an inevitable part of the story. In the same way, and Jesus intuited that or recognized that, in the same way that the eating of the apple in the Garden of Eden was inevitable. You tell children not to eat an apple, they're going to eat it. And actually it was a necessary fault, as we will say on Easter Saturday, "Oh, happy fault of Adam." Because if they hadn't been disobedient, acted out, then all of the rest of the story of salvation wouldn't have unfolded in the way that it did. So there's a paradox here that actually what we think of as the dark side is actually part of the enlightenment process, right? So it's not that Jesus is sort of manipulating Judas. I think it's just that the meaning of it is that he is absorbing Judas and not rejecting him. He's not saying what you're doing is a good thing as such, but what happens when you're betrayed but you act like this? I mean, okay, what happens when you're betrayed normally? When you feel betrayed, I mean, sometimes we imagine we're betrayed, but if you feel betrayed, what's your reaction to that betrayal? Anger, resentment.
Why did you do it?
Hmm?
Why did you do it?
That's a very good question. Isaac, you have a very good question. It's Isaac, yeah? Yes, very good question. Can I come back to that? Because I'm not sure I can give you a straight answer. Well, one reason he did it, perhaps, is because, well, we don't know why he did it. It doesn't say why Judas does this. In another part of the story, it says that Judas was given some money. But we're not sure if that was the real reason. Some people say it was because he felt Jesus had let them down, or he wasn't going to be the king. Judas wanted him to become the king, and Jesus said, "No, that's not what I'm here for." So we don't know is the simple answer, but.
But he was saying that was the reaction when you've been betrayed. You think, why did that person do that to me? I think that's what he meant.
Oh, so say it again. Sorry, I missed. Sorry.
He was saying, you asked the question, right?
Yes.
How do you feel when you are betrayed?
Yes. Oh.
He's saying the person will say, why did you do
Oh,
that?
I'm sorry. Okay. So thank you. I'm glad you didn't ask me that other question, because I can't answer it. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. We say why. Jesus doesn't actually say why, does he? He accepts it. But one of the things we don't accept, or one of the things we don't do when we feel betrayed, somebody's let us down, or our expectations have been shattered, or we feel betrayed, one of the things we don't do is immediately to accept it. We resist, we resent, we fight against it. And we often want revenge, or we retreat into ourselves and lick our wounds and feel, shut down and lock the door and feel miserable. But is Jesus doing any of these things? He's not. He's actually almost. What normally happens is when we feel betrayed is we reject the person who's betraying us, although it's too late because they betrayed us. But he is anticipating that, and by accepting the betrayal, he neutralizes it. Yes, is that right? He's and this is the deepest dynamic of the redemptive meaning of the cross. That we are given the experience and the evidence of acceptance, whatever we do. He died for our sins. That's what that means. So anyway, so here is Judas taking the bread. Which is an act of falsehood. That's the betrayal almost, to accept this gift of self from Jesus. He takes the bread, but as a formality, and apparently, and then Satan enters him at that moment of taking the bread. Why does Satan is the symbol of resistance, of denial, of negativity, and of opposition, the stumbling block, the thing that gets in the way, the thing that messes things up when you're on a trip or in a project you're working on. So why does Satan enter him at this precise moment? Taking the bread.
The neutralising, to actually combat the neutralising effect of Jesus giving the bread to him.
Okay.
Just not accept that act of forgiveness, but to sort of punch back.
Yes. Okay, so he's hardened his heart. Have you ever done that?
Yes.
So we know what it means to Satan enter you. Doesn't mean this little horned imp, but it's the hardening, the closing of the heart when you know, or something in you knows, that you are actually being offered love. So Judas is playing a very important teaching role in this story, and Jesus is acknowledging the importance of his role, and knowing that his heart had hardened and closed, he sort of says, "Well, okay, do it. Do what you're going to do, and don't drag it out any longer than it needs to be." It's interesting. Do it quickly. Why does he say do it quickly?
He might change his mind.
Okay, then none of the others at the table understood why he said this. So they're in the dark. The only one who would have an inkling of what is happening here would be John. But the rest didn't get the information they wanted. They can't see the meaning of it. Since Judas had charge of the common fund, some of them thought Jesus was telling him, buy what we need for the festival, or telling him to give something to the poor. So, missing the point. And as soon as Judas had taken the piece of bread, he went out of the room, and it was night. One of the shortest verses in the New Testament. I think it's 2 words in Greek. Anyway, so it's as short as the other verse. The 2-word verse, Jesus wept. So it was night. So Judas has gone off to do his act of betrayal, to start the process. It's as if he was a kind of a practical person. Judas, he was in charge. He was the accountant, and he was the one who did things for this group. And so that's what the others thought he was going to do. And what he's actually going to do is also very practical. He's going off to betray Jesus and set this whole story of the passion into motion. Because it has to be done. Anyway, it's happening. When he had gone, Jesus said, "Now has the Son of Man been glorified." Now he's speaking at a much higher level of dialogue. Now has the Son of Man been glorified, and in him God has been glorified. If God has been glorified in him, God will in turn glorify him in himself, and will glorify him very soon. Little children, I shall be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I told the people, where I am going, you cannot come. And it's at this point he gives them the commandment of love. Strange moment to be doing it, isn't it? I give you a new commandment. It's not actually in the gospel, but it is in the passage. I give you a new commandment. Love one another as I have. Love one another. You must love one another just as I have loved you. It is by your love for one another that everyone will recognize you as my disciples. Well, what a strange moment to give this teaching, his supreme commandment of love, that sums up the whole of what he had to say and teach, at this moment of rejection, of betrayal. Why would it come at this moment, do you think?
He knew he wouldn't be around for long.
Okay, yes. He wouldn't have much time, yes.
He's expressed love. So, he has to be.
Yes. I mean, so he's expressed his love in that moment of betrayal. He did not react as we would expect him and ourselves to do by betraying or rejecting the person who had betrayed him, who was his enemy. So he has accepted his enemy, he's loved his enemy. So this is the supremely authoritative moment, actually, to put this teaching into words, because he has actually lived it in this moment of betrayal. Another one? Okay.
Ennis Blue asks, when is it right to intervene in another person's sufferings? If someone had intervened to prevent the cross, what might have happened to the whole universe salvation thingy?
Well, as Julian of Norwich says, we only need to understand. We only understand what we need to understand. So I think Thomas Aquinas did say that it wasn't strictly speaking necessary that the Son of God should suffer and die. It was necessary for salvation that that the Word should become flesh, that God would become human. It wasn't essential that that the Son of God, the Word, would suffer, be betrayed, and being given into the hands of wicked men and be crucified. But given the fact that he was the Son of God, and that it is very difficult for us to accept the truth, it was inevitable that this is how he would be treated, that he would be rejected. But it wasn't strictly speaking necessary, but it was inevitable. So at this very dark moment, there is this dazzling light. What's that?
Viewers are liking the play of shadows and
Oh, are they? Well, that's exactly. Oh, well, there you are. See, just goes to show you something. Yes, I mean this is about light and dark, and it's we'll see in a minute. It's about the struggle. This is a time of real turbulence and struggle between two elemental principles: truth and falsehood, love and betrayal. Which is stronger, love or betrayal? Which is so love has triumphed, but the struggle is at a human level is still intense and anguishing. So now, but it's out of this passionate and intense moment that this supremely simple commandment of love emerges. Simon Peter then says, "Lord, where are you going?" So it's funny how Peter always kind of slightly brings the tone down a little bit, or asks slightly the wrong question, but out of his own goodness and good intentions. And Jesus replied, "Now you cannot follow me where I am going, but later you shall follow me." So just as he was predicting Judas's betrayal, he's now seeing Peter's ultimate fidelity. That Peter will ultimately, not now, but later, you will be faithful. You will follow me and go where I am going, but not now. And Peter, of course, again missing the point, says, Why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. And he believes it. But with that same insight with which he had diagnosed or perceived the betrayal of Judas, Jesus says, "Lay down your life for me?" Really? "In truth, I tell you, before the cock crows, you will have disowned me 3 times. So the disown, betray, is another form of betrayal, not as active perhaps as Judas is, but still in terms of relationship, to deny someone, as he will, to deny that you even knew them, is a betrayal, and that is exactly, of course, how Peter felt it. So here's very strange. Here is Jesus predicting to Judas that he's going to betray him, and then, knowing that it's going to happen, says, "Do it. I'm not going to resist you, and I'm not going to reject you. If this is what you are doing, do it." And he says to Peter, the head of the team, he says, despite the fact that you are making these protestations of fidelity, you will also betray me. And how devastating that would have been to Peter to hear that. And the penny only drops. He only understands that it was true after he's done it, when the cock crows the 3rd time, and he recognizes and remembers what Jesus had warned him about. So in this case, with Peter, it's almost like a preparation. He's again accepting the betrayal or the disowning in advance. And if you accept something that's going to happen to you in advance, what are you doing? You're absorbing it already. And that's, I think, the very heart of the dynamic of the Passion story. That everything, the worst you could imagine, the darkest potential of human existence, that's sin, is actually being accepted, actually being incorporated into this act of love. That is reflected in the commandment of love. So this is how the story opens. We'll take it step by step from now on. You could say Jesus had a genius for reality. Most of us pull back and try to avoid reality when it's as stark and as painful as this. He had a passion for the truth. He spoke the truth. And these are very dangerous traits in human society, to see reality and to tell the truth is bound to get you into trouble, because so much of human society is built upon a dilution of the truth and illusion and denial. What Jesus is doing here is simply reflecting his inability to deny, either psychological denial or the denial of the truth. So here we have the betrayal, the worst thing that anyone can really experience, to be betrayed in this way. And yet, because of this acceptance and of the betrayal and the rejection, the word that comes out from this text is glorified. It's in this moment of betrayal that Jesus says, the Son of Man, that's me, the Son of Man has been glorified, and in him God has been glorified. And if God has been glorified in him, God will in turn glorify him in himself, and will glorify him very soon. What is glorify? What does that mean? What's the glory of God? Why glorified? Why should Jesus be glorified by this at this moment? And why? Well, it's because Jesus is who he is, and John is trying to remind us that what is happening in Jesus is a direct reflection or a direct translation of the divine in the human. But why should Jesus be? So if Jesus is glorified, that means God is glorified in him. But what does glorified mean? What did Saint Irenaeus say?
It's like ultimate love.
What's that?
Ultimate love.
Yes. Okay, yeah. Yes. The glory of God is the human being fully alive. Isn't this a strange moment to be fully alive? Why is this the moment where Jesus is fully alive?
He's accepted everything now.
Yeah.
He's moving forward, and what he knows has to happen.
And who else accepts everything and shines on good and bad alike? Yes, isn't it? So this is where we see Jesus as the Son of Man, human, experiencing deep pain and disturbance and anguish in this time of betrayal, and at the same time we see Jesus as the Word made flesh, loving, kind to the ungrateful and the wicked, which is how he describes God's attitude in the Sermon on the Mount. You must be like your heavenly Father, who is like the sun, who shines on good and bad alike, who's kind of accepting of the good and accepting of the bad, like the statue of the Cristo in Rio de Janeiro, sort of looking out upon the good and the bad in the city, and who shines on good and bad alike, and is kind, is actually proactively kind to the ungrateful and the wicked, the kind of people who would betray you. So in the same person we see the fully human and the fully divine. Another union of opposites taking place here, along with the light and the shade, the light and the dark. So, and we remember at this point that he said, you must be like this. We don't just admire Jesus. I think was it Nietzsche who said this? I don't know. That we don't just admire him, we have to imitate him. It wouldn't have been Nietzsche. We are being told here, this is what it means to be fully human. So this is our lesson, this is our invitation, and we're being shown really our capacity to be divinized. To be fully human is to be divinized. So I think we may see that, as it began by talking about the stages of the spiritual journey and stages of contemplation as the mystical tradition describe it. And I think we should keep that in mind as we reflect on and repeat and share the story of the Passion, because in a way we could see these stages of contemplation or the spiritual journey being lived out in Jesus, in this story. One of the essential elements of mystical theology and indeed of the gospel is this union of opposites. And this is the work we're doing in meditation, in deep prayer, is to allow what seems to be opposed to each other actually not to reject or betray each other, but to be integrated.
So can I ask you the message then to
Sure.
use the divinity within us all to rise above the earthly tribulations in the way that Jesus just represented it there in the gospel? Is that what the message is?
Yes, I think the message is that we have to embrace reality as it is and not pick and choose the bits that we like and leave out the bits we don't like. We have to do it in prosperity and adversity, and that this work of integration is also a work of healing, because what we see happening here in Jesus' acceptance and, as it were, defusing or forgiveness of betrayal, of the betrayal that he knew would happen from people who could not yet see the truth and accept the reality as he does. But this is healing that he's doing. This is a healing of the human condition, because it's only very human, but it's not the essential human. It's like to deny the reality, to deny the truth, and to run away from this essential work of integration. And but what he's showing is that actually it is the essentially human thing to do, because our essential human nature, despite its weakness, is capable of this divine wholeness and divine integration. Yeah. So he's actually showing us, we think we're all like Judas, or at best like Peter. You know, we just can't hack it, we just can't do it when we're under pressure, or our human weakness. And the gift here and the grace here, the teaching here, is this experience of acceptance, the acceptance of our weakness, of our betrayal, of our capacity for betrayal. And if we can accept that acceptance, this is the key thing now, if we can accept this acceptance, then we know who we are. Then we're healed of that misperception about ourselves that we are only just, Judases and Peters. But if we can accept that we are accepted in our weakness as Judases and Peters, then we see ourselves to be something different. That's redemption. That's what redemption is. We are actually touched and embraced and awakened to a true self-knowledge and to an awareness of who we truly are, which is not less than the image of God, the icon of God.